Okay, so welcome everyone. My name's Kat Hinton. I work for Shropshire Wildlife Trust and I work on something called the Growing Confidence Project, which is aimed at young people between the ages of 14 and 20, no, between the ages of 11 and 24, which is part of a national group of projects called Our Bright Future. Yes, so we have been doing these online question times since the summer, since lockdown started. We've been doing them almost every month since May. So this month's one is on HS2, which is obviously quite a big issue, quite a contentious issue. And we've got 4 panellists today to kind of help you get a better understanding of the issue and the various parts of it. We've got Carol Day, who is a solicitor at the law firm Lee Day, I think that's how you pronounce it. We have Alan Wright joining us from the Wildlife Trust for Lancashire, Manchester and North Merseyside. We have Kay Brennan, who is joining us from the Wildlife Trust head office, who is head of campaigns for the Wildlife Trust. And we have Callan, who is joining us from Bath. Yes, and his involvement is that he has actively campaigned around HS2 and was campaigning at some of the sites in some of the woodlands over the summer. So in anticipation of this, I sent some of you a newspaper article, a Guardian newspaper article entitled "Fears Grow Over HS2's Potential Impact on Biodiversity." I think that was written in February. So hopefully you've had a chance to read that, and that might have got you thinking about some of the questions that you might have around HS2, things that you want to talk about. So bear those in mind. Like I said, later when everyone's presented and talked a little bit more, feel free to ask any questions that you've got then, or type them in the chat box as you think of them. So first of all, I'm going to get each of our panelists just to introduce themselves, and then we'll go back round them and they'll tell you what they've got to say. So Carol, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Me? Hello, can everyone hear me? Good evening, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Kat. Yeah, my name's Carol Day and I'm a lawyer at Lee Day, which is a public interest law firm. Just a little bit of background. I didn't start out as a lawyer. I started out as an environmental policy person and campaigner. So I did a BSc at university in environmental sciences. I did a master's in nature conservation, and I worked for the Wildlife Trust for a while. I worked for the Warwickshire Wildlife Trust doing practical management on nature reserves, and also for Surrey Wildlife Trust doing conservation and policy work there. And then I went to work for WWF for about 20 years. Doing campaigning on site safeguard in the UK. And during all of that, I decided I really wanted to get into doing more environmental law. So I converted to law while I was working in conservation. So I did a lot of distance learning courses and qualified in 2002. And since then, I've been working as a lawyer. I left WWF in 2013 and I split my time. I work part-time in a law firm in Lee Day and part-time also for the RSPB. So I have a nice mixture of kind of campaigning and legal sort of litigation. So if anybody's interested in talking about that later, we can touch on that, obviously, if we sort of finish with everything on HS2 first. So that's me. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Carol. Brilliant. Alan, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, hi. I've been working now, in fact, I think in January I've been working for the Wildlife Trust for 10 years. Before that, I was a journalist, working on all sorts of regional and national newspapers, and I worked abroad for 2 years in Bermuda, which were very happy days, but I had to come back for my health, really. I kind of got to a stage in journalism where I didn't think I was making much of a difference, so I thought I wanted to work in conservation, and I got a job on a project at the Wildlife Trust, which I think that the 2 ways of actually getting into it, 2 ways, very good ways of actually getting into our business, is to actually try and get through it on a project or volunteer. And I was working for a project for the Wildlife Trust and Lancashire County Council, and then I kind of got a job as a communications manager or communications officer, and then I've moved on to become communications and campaigns manager. So as I say, it's the best job I've ever had. I actually feel as though I'm making a difference. It's great to work in conservation, but there are so many different ways you can do that. I now have 3 young people working for me in conservation, in the communications team, and they're fantastic. And it just shows that at hugely different levels you can actually get into this business.
Thank you. That's brilliant. I like the fact you say it's the best job ever. Just because I'm going along the top of my screen, Callum, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Callum. I'm currently a student at Bath University studying geography, and I spend most of my free time working for Extinction Rebellion youth and campaigning across the country with young people to get them involved in climate activism and organising protests up and down the country. During the summer and in coming months, I'll be at HS2 protection camps, and I'll be talking about my experience for that today.
Thank you. And last but not least, we've got Kay. We're just hoping your internet's good enough.
Let's try, shall we? So hi everybody, I've been the head of campaigns at the Wildlife Trust. I'm based in the central team, as Kat said, just over a year now. And before that I was lead campaigner at Woodland Trust for over 10 years, and I was setting up their campaigns team, working on HS2 and other big national campaigns to protect ancient woodlands and special trees from development mostly. But the most experience that I'd had before I joined Woodland Trust of campaigning was as volunteer within my community. So just what Alan said, it's through volunteering and getting involved on the ground that I ended up in this area. I joined the incineration campaign, and I worked with my community on a waste reduction project, and I also set up a random acts of kindness group in Nottingham, and we do an annual random acts of kindness day, hugs and different things like that to get Nottingham to be a compassionate city. And I became a bit of a spokesperson for that as well. I got involved with local media, designing posters, getting events set up and that kind of stuff. And in turn, that helped me to understand how to talk to people about what I was doing and how to bring them along with me as well. And also how to influence big corporate players, because the incinerator company are still, although they have not got their third line incinerator, they're big corporates. So there's a lot of learning in there. And I guess part of that is what I'm saying is that you don't have to be in conservation with your wellies on, out in the ground, releasing newts and doing fabulous things, with loppers to be in conservation and making a difference. And also you don't have to be a paid worker to get experience. There's lots of ways you can get involved and lots of roles you can play to make a difference for nature.
Thank you, Kay. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you. Yes, because I think lots of people here, like Grace, are all looking for jobs and entry points into the sector. So it's good that everyone's coming from different backgrounds. Right, on to the subject of the day, which is HS2. So I think what we're going to do is, in order of our panelists, is that if they tell us a little bit about their involvement in HS2 and what they know about the history of it and what we can or can't do about it. So if we come to you first, Kay, because I think you've been involved in HS2 and campaigns around that for the longest. So if we're all right to hand over to you first.
Yeah, so a really potted history of what has happened is way back when, nearly 12 years ago now. It's been going on for that long. New railway put forward. It's a cross-party initiative. I think actually it was the Labour Party that put it forward, but every party in government is behind the idea of HS2. Nowadays it's the Green Party that have actually said no. Everyone is the principle of high-speed rail. And this new railway was put forward to improve connectivity from south to north, help with commuter time, especially from London up to Birmingham, and the idea of reducing carbon and dealing with climate change, getting people out of their cars, was also put forward as a benefit after a little while as well. And because of its huge impact, and because it was deemed to be nationally important, its infrastructure, which means it has its own special planning system, but HS2 as a piece of work has its own special planning system that it goes over. It's a hybrid bill, which Carol I know will know a bit more about, but ultimately it's incredibly detailed. It's gone through Parliament in huge stages, and because it's essentially a straight line, or it was meant to be a straight line up the country, it's really hard on an island to avoid very much when you're trying to do that kind of thing. And so as you can imagine, the scale of nature loss and the damage that we would be seeing was going to be huge. At the Woodland Trust, they actually employed somebody. They managed to get a grant from a grant maker, employed someone to go through the environmental statement when it first came out, because it was 50,000 pages. And that person's been working for the Woodland Trust just on HS for the last 8 years. That's how in depth and detailed it really is. And as I was saying, the detail of it is huge. It happens in stages, and at the moment, what you're seeing now is what we call phase 1. So there is a route that goes up from London towards Birmingham. When it hits Birmingham, it kind of goes off with a bit of a Y shape to east and west, and that's where some of the other wildlife trusts come into. But the work that you're seeing now is what's happening to kick off construction on phase 1. And I have to say, although what we're seeing is really, really awful, I'm sure all of you have seen the stuff in the news and the amount of damage that's being done, but all of this has been legally sanctioned by the government, except for the stuff that's being done outside of assurances and different things that they have in place, like licenses. But the scale of loss was going to be a lot worse years ago if NGOs like the Woodland Trust, the Wildlife Trust, Greenpeace and the National Trust, ISPB, weren't really into the detail and weren't influencing really, really early on. And we're still doing that now. And we'll talk later about how you can get involved in that. But it's bad, but it's only phase 1 that we're seeing now. So there's more to come and more opportunities for us, hopefully, to make things much better for nature.
Thank you, Kay. That's a really good kind of introduction. So hopefully you can all see that Kay has quite a nice kind of overview of everything that's happened so far. Right, so next, if I hand over to Carol, I know you've got a, someone's put something in a, oh, there we are, Mia, thank you. Mia's put a link to HS2 timeline, that's really useful. I'm just going to, no, hang on, I'm confusing myself now. Right, I'm looking, right, I'm going to try and, yeah, I'll try and share my screen. There we are, right, hang on. Just check it's the right one.
That's the right one.
That's it, isn't it? Yes.
That's it. And I'm such a total technophobe that either Mia or Kat's kindly agreed that they're going to move these slides on for me. There's not many of them. It's just to sort of, you know, focus a bit what I'm going to say. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? I'm not going to dwell on this too long. That's just there, and we can come back to it later if we want to give you a bit of a flavour of the kind of work that that we do as a public interest law firm. So, and it's how I really got involved with HS2 actually, was because we were approached by 3 individuals, one of whom was Chris Packham, to do some work on, initially on work around sort of raptor persecution, bird of prey persecution, and other issues such as things like badger culling. So HS2 was one of the cases that came out of that, but I can come back to that at the end if you like. We can talk a little bit more about some of the other cases that we're doing if people are interested in them. But in the meantime, let's skip to HS2 and move on, please. Now, before I talk about HS2, I just wanted to say just a couple of minutes about what judicial review is, because what we were involved in on HS2 was a judicial review of the government's recent decision to go ahead with the rail scheme. Judicial review, just to say what it is, first of all, it's a civil law process where individuals or NGOs can challenge the legality of decisions, acts and omissions that are made by public bodies. So it doesn't apply to private corporate bodies. It only applies to bodies that make decisions, public bodies making decisions. So it's quite an important distinction. And it's also, it unfortunately doesn't get at the merits of the decision. So in a sense, in the law, it doesn't matter whether a decision is a good decision or a sensible decision, it's whether it's a lawful decision. And that means it's being made in a lawful manner. So the really important thing about JR is that you have to sort of appreciate it's not about the merits of the decision, it's about how that decision was made. And that's a major kind of sort of limitation of it, really. What's the process for it? You apply to court, you apply on the papers, which is that you write it all down, you send your permission into the court, and a judge will look at your papers and decide whether you've got permission to go ahead and have a substantive hearing. And that's where everybody rolls up to the High Court with your advocates, and you get the opportunity to put your case as does the other side, and you have a full hearing before a judge, and then you get a judgment at the end of all of that. You can get various remedies coming out of that, which it could just be that you can have a declaration which actually says what the law is, or right the way through to some of the other remedies that we're quite often seeking, and what we were seeking here, which is something called a quashing order. And that's where you actually quash the decision that has been made. And you can also ask for an injunction as well, and that's something else that we ask for here, and I'll come on to that in a second. You've got to have what's called standing to be able to bring a judicial review. That means you've got to be sufficiently interested into the matter that's being challenged. In this country, that's a fairly open process, and most people can get standing before the court. But there are also very strict time limits on when you can bring cases, so you have to act really quickly. For a lot of planning decisions, well, pretty much all planning decisions, you have to bring the case within 6 weeks, and for all other cases within 3 months. So it's a very rapid process that gets going very quickly as soon as the decision has been made. So that's just a little bit of background, just so you sort of understand the process that we were undertaking here. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Yeah, there we are. Now it's worked.
Sorry, that sort of followed on all a bit briefly. Okay, so the HS2 case. Kay gave us a little bit of helpful background about that, but I think it's worth saying a couple of other things as well. As she mentioned, it's certainly not a new proposal. It's been going for a very long time and involved a very long parliamentary process as well. And incidentally, after that parliamentary process, there were a number, I think it was literally 10 judicial reviews that were brought as a result of that parliamentary bill getting royal assent. All of those were unsuccessful. They went right the way up to the Supreme Court. So it's not as if this isn't an issue that hasn't been litigated in the past. Those cases were taken some kind of, well, when it got royal assent, I think around about 2017. The case that we took was concentrating on phase 1 of HS2, and that's the phase between London and Birmingham. As we know, phase 2 concerns Birmingham up to Manchester and Leeds, but we were concentrating on phase 1. And we know from the papers that were published that that really is going to take less than 10 minutes off the journey between London and Birmingham. Most of that journey will be in a cutting. And that's going to damage, as Kay mentioned, a very large number of important wildlife sites, including, I think, in total for the whole project, so that's including phase 2, over 100 ancient woodlands. And just worth also bearing in mind that it's not going to be carbon neutral for over 100 years either. But anyway, none of that was really the basis of the case that we took, although it does form a very important context for it. Going back a little bit to last year, 2019, some of you may remember, if you've been following this process, that when Boris Johnson came into power, he paused the HS2 project, and he announced in August that he was going to set up a new panel of experts to look at HS2. And the way he framed it at that stage was that it would be looking at all of the evidence afresh to see whether the government wanted to go ahead with the project. So that panel was set up. It was chaired by a gentleman called Sir Douglas Oakervie, and had a number of different experts looking at economics and all sorts of other aspects as well. At that time, the government said it was actually going to continue with some of the damaging works that it was doing to some of the ancient woodlands, particularly the woodlands around about Staffordshire and Warwickshire. We challenged that immediately on behalf of Chris Packham to say that if you've actually put a halt on the project, you're deciding whether you're going ahead, you really should be stopping all of the construction works, because if you decide that you're not going ahead, all of the benefits that HS2 was purportedly going to bring are not going to be realised, and you've lost those ancient woodlands that you're not going to be able to replace, for no reason. So we challenged that immediately, and we were successful at that stage, and the government backed off and said, yeah, that's quite right, we will pause all of the construction works until the Oakervie process has actually responded. Now, the panel took evidence all the way through the autumn, was supposed to report in the early part of 2020, but didn't do that until about February. I think it was about the 11th of February. Boris Johnson stood up in Parliament and said that they had decided to give the green light for HS2 to go ahead. So on the basis of that decision, we decided to look at the Oakervie report. We went through it very carefully with a fine-tooth comb, and decided that we could try and bring a judicial review on the basis of that decision. There were 3 grounds initially. I've only put 2 on this slide here because those were the 2 grounds that went forward to the Court of Appeal. There were initially 3 grounds. The first was that the Oakervie process we felt hadn't been run lawfully. The deputy chair had not been involved in some of the key decisions. A lot of the information hadn't been given to all of the panel members. Certain meetings had been held without other members of the panel present. So we felt the whole thing wasn't thoroughly independent, wasn't thoroughly scrupulous and robust. And so the first ground that we brought the case on was on that basis. The second and third grounds are the ones that went through to the Court of Appeal. The second ground was around the contents of the Oakerby review and whether that review was sufficient for the purpose of Cabinet making that decision. So when we looked at the Oakerby review, we noticed there was an awful lot missing from it. There was a lot of information that had been put in by various people who provided evidence, including quite a few environmental NGOs like the Wildlife Trusts and the Woodland Trust and RSPB and Wildlife Link and others. And many of the representations they'd made hadn't been summarised in that review. So we felt that Cabinet weren't being provided with a full and proper appraisal of all of the environmental impacts that HS2 would cause. The third ground was that we felt that the government had failed to take account of the effects of HS2 on the increased greenhouse gases and the increase in global temperature that would arise between now and 2050, following the obligations that the UK had made under the Paris Agreement and the 2008 Climate Change Act. Now, we had a hearing. This was literally just as we all went down into lockdown. So it was, I think, the first remote hearing that the court had actually held. And we had that on this, I think it was going back to the 6th of April, in front of what we call the divisional court. That's 2 judges, incredibly hostile hearing, where we applied also for an injunction to pend all works on HS2 until the court had reached its judgment. Now, the 2 judges gave their judgment immediately. That's very unusual. Normally they would go away and they would reach a judgment, written judgment sometime later, but they actually gave us a judgment after the hearing had been held. They refused the injunction. They refused permission for judicial review to go ahead to a substantive hearing. And they also said that we hadn't brought the case in time. They said because it had been brought within 6 weeks and 3 days that we were out of time and we shouldn't have been able to bring it. On the basis of that, we lodged an appeal with the Court of Appeal, and a hearing was held before 3 Lord Justices of Appeal on the 6th of April. And as I say, we went forward with those 2 grounds that you can see on the slide there. The Court of Appeal came back with their judgment in July, right at the end of July, 31st. And they said, we didn't agree with the High Court on promptness. The case was brought properly, but they found against us on both of those 2 grounds of appeal. They said, first of all, it doesn't matter, in a sense, it doesn't matter that the Oakerby Review panel report was not comprehensive. The Cabinet could easily have looked in all of the, could have looked back over the parliamentary process, all of those debates, they could have looked at the environmental statement, all of the information was there for the looking, so it doesn't matter that the report didn't have all of that information in it. And in response to the Oakerby Review and climate change point, they said, well, the Oakerby Review, just an ad hoc process that the government set up, it wasn't a statutory process, and they made a distinction here between the Heathrow case, which many of you will be aware of, where they did find that the Paris Agreement hadn't been properly taken into account. They said in Heathrow that applies because it's a statutory process. This is not. It's something very, very different, and the government is not bound to take the Paris Agreement or the Climate Change Act into consideration in these kinds of ad hoc processes. But they said, even so, we're sure that the government did that, even though they're not bound to do it. So that was very, very disappointing, obviously, and Chris was devastated with the result. We would have liked to have seen the court scrutinise that decision properly. We can't believe that the whole of the Cabinet, many of whom weren't in government when that parliamentary process was going through, were completely aware of the ins and outs of all those parliamentary processes, all of the information in those environmental statements. So that seems a real stretch, really, to believe that. And we also can't believe that all of the cabinets were fully aware of their obligation under the Paris Agreement and all of the provisions of the Climate Change Act when they took that decision as well. All of this, I think, is very important. If I could just move to the last slide just to finish off. In the context of where we are, you know, we're in a climate emergency, we're in a biodiversity emergency, but I think this gives you an indication of, I think, really where the courts are, even though, we all feel incredibly strongly about these issues. And this is a picture here from a march held 18 months ago that Chris Packham had organised, the March for Wildlife. The Wildlife Trust were there with all their banners. It was great to see. Where people are showing the strength of feeling around environmental issues. But I think the court is very out of step with that feeling. And I think the judiciary particularly it's a bit like turning the Titanic around. They're very slowly and incrementally moving towards being more receptive to environmental issues and particularly climate change issues. But that, I think we're a long way off from that. So, I look forward to talking in the questions about how we can look forward from this and, what we might have been able to learn out of this for phase 2 of HS2. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Carol. That was really good. I've learnt lots there. Right, good. There we are. Guy has commented. He was telling me even this morning on this walk, he was at that walk for wildlife. So it's good. It's good to know. Yeah. Yes, I don't know about anyone else. I feel quite frustrated sometimes that we can't do enough to get our voices heard. So let's go next to Callum. I know Callum has been involved in some of the campaigning this summer around some of the destruction that HS2 are carrying out. Do you want to share your screen, Callum, and talk through what you've seen?
Yeah. Can you all see that?
Perfect.
Okay. So throughout the summer, I was involved at the HS2 protection camps up and down the country. And if it's going to work, there you go. So thought I'd just start by saying what is a protection camp, and then we'll go into some of the ins and outs of who is at a protection camp and what you can do. So a protection camp is a community campsite that's been set up along the phase 1 of HS2. And the aim of those camps is to delay the works of HS2 that's already undergoing and try and save the ancient woodlands. All camps up and down the line are autonomous and independent, meaning there is no umbrella group. There is the Stop HS2 campaign. However, each camp is independent of that and doesn't have to follow any particular rules or anything like that. Most camps are currently set up on places like nature reserves, wildlife sites, ancient woodlands, and some are even set up on HS2 land themselves. This means that they are at risk of eviction from HS2 and bailiffs and police. There is one site that if you are going, we would recommend you start at, and that is at Crackley Woods near Coventry, as that's a private property on farmland. And at the camps, there's 10 to 20 people that permanently live there, but because activists' lifestyles are very fluid and free, you can have people coming and going all the time. So at the camps, there is an emphasis on community and skill sharing. So this sort of means that everyone chips in with all tasks that need to be done, be it food collection or water gathering. Every morning you tend to have a check-in where someone will volunteer for these roles, and it's a very sort of communal lifestyle. And because everyone's come from different walks of life, some people will have been campaigning for 50 years and some people it'll be their first time campaigning or being involved in direct action. Everyone's got different skills, so it's really encouraged that those skills are shared all around the members of the camps. For example, tree climbing, gardening, growing their own food, and legal workshops where we'll tell people all about their rights. And on this slide, you can see an obligatory photo of me learning to climb a tree. So we do various different types of actions, but they all come under the term non-violent direct action or non-violent civil disobedience. Now, this has a precedent of working in the past. It's what Gandhi used, it's what the suffragettes used, it was what was used in the civil rights movement, and it is successful in so many instances, with the emphasis on non-violence. So any act of violence is a bit of a grey line, but we won't go around punching guards in the face or anything like that. So because we're all autonomous and we've all got our own ideas, sometimes we'll have a nice creative action that's never been done before and we'll try it out and see if it works. But the most common things we do are sending activists into the trees that are about to be chopped down. And that obviously prevents them being chopped down because they can't legally chop a tree down with a person in it. We have lock-on tubes, which you can see in the photo in the bottom right, where people will put their sort of arm into a tube and then lock themselves to it. And there is someone else locked to that tube as well, which means that you tend to go in front of like the gates to an entrance of a site, and the police will have to cut you out before they can arrest you. You do have, there's a specialist police team, but we won't go into that yet. Other actions can include sort of climbing onto the machinery or construction vehicles. So Tuesday, one of my friends climbed on top of a digger and delayed the works of HS2 for 3 hours. And even little successes like that we're counting as good, because the more delay we have, the more it racks up the cost and the more pressure there is and time to stop it and the more wildlife we're saving. And one of the final things we're doing is outreach. So this is something that I'm doing right now, educating you all as well. But we will often go out into the community and talk about what is HS2, how we can stop it, what we need at the camps, and get more and more people involved in this campaign to put enough pressure politically as well. So at a HS2 site, there's often a difference in policing to normal protests. Often if you're just doing a school strike or a peaceful protest march in town centre, the police are quite civil and treat it openly. However, when you're at a HS2 site, it's a lot more hostile. Brutality is very common in amongst the HS2 security and the police force. And HS2 have their own private police force, which we'll get into later, who use inappropriate force that's often deemed illegal and assaults. Because of this, we do encourage that anyone attending a site has an experience in activism and has done what we call an NVDA training, non-violent direct action training, which essentially runs you through the scenarios and how to respond to the police, as well as knowing your legal rights when it comes to interacting with police, interacting with security, and in the worst case scenario of arrest. So various people on site, we do have nicknames for this one. We call these the carrots. These are HS2 security guards dressed in all orange. And their role is to observe and report what's going on, and often sort of radio for assistance. They aren't supposed to be hands-on with activists. However, often they'll step above that line and do so, pushing and shoving to get their own way. They don't have any powers of arrest, so we'll often call for what's known as the NET, which is the National Eviction Team. This is HS2's private police and security force. They're dressed in all black and as you can see from the photo, look quite intimidating. They often lay hands on protesters and cause harm. They can perform a citizen's arrest and will often sort of detain an activist until the police turn up and can do a formal arrest. It's really hard to hold these people accountable because often they won't have their badge numbers showing, and when they do, it means they often have like a different number to what they're actually doing. The police act differently depending on which force it is. Warwickshire, which is up near Crackley Woods, up near Birmingham, that area, are often quite reasonable and trustworthy, so they've been quite civil with protesters in the past. Not always, but a lot more civil than other forces. But as you get closer to London, generally the Met and Thames Valley Police, they're quite sort of malicious towards protesters. Thames Valley Police in particular will act violently towards protesters and look the other way, turn their cameras off in acts of violence. As a result of this, a lot of people at the HS2 sites don't trust the police because they've been injured in the past or stepped above their powers. And some police forces do actually take backhanders from HS2 and the government to be complicit in this. The police in particular will push for harsher conditions for protesters. So this could be extending the 24-hour custody window. I've known a friend that was in custody for, I think it was 36.5 hours before she was released. And all she did was stand in some water in front of a tree that was being shot down. But it's not all about being arrested or anything like that. There is so much roles that you can do that don't involve any risk of arrest, because everyone will have different levels of comfort with that. So for every person arrested, there's normally around 20 people behind the scenes working on this cause. Some of the examples: media, getting social media presence, well-being, legal, we've got examples here today, cooking for the activists on site, talking with the press, doing camp maintenance, and going out into the community, like I mentioned before. But everyone is welcome to come to the camp and experience the life firsthand. Recently, because of COVID, obviously things have changed, as we all know. But as of now, it's legal for political bodies such as XR, HS2 Rebellion, or Stop HS2 to break the rule of six. And while you're on a campsite, you're often considered to be a household, so those household rules apply to you. Hygiene's always been important, but ever more so now. And we do encourage people to bring hand sanitizers and face masks, and would recommend and strongly encourage that you do not attend a campsite or risk the activist's health if you have symptoms, self-isolating, or are vulnerable. And finally, I'll touch on what you can do. The best thing you can do is come to the camps. You can have a look at HS2 Rebellion for the map and directions. I'm sure Mia can find that and link it in the chat. But we need as many people as possible to try and be learning these skills, getting into the trees, supporting the activists, and doing what they can. If you can't come, you can bring donations to a campsite. All food is gratefully received. We do grow our own on some sites. However, often it's donations from food banks and things like that that we rely on. You could try connecting with your local camp if you're near the route, or if you're not near the route, you can connect with your local Extinction Rebellion group. Often they're doing like a monthly trip to a local site to support them over a weekend or something like that. Each camp will have different needs and different rules, so it's worth checking on the website hes2rebellion.earth for their current wish lists and guidance. Not everyone will be able to come to the camps, and we acknowledge that. So there is an online thing that you can do as well. This will include social media monitoring, watching live streams, making notes of badge numbers, things like that are all helpful. Promoting the cause, sharing, retweeting, whatever it is you do. Complaining to HS2. HS2's complaint line often gets flooded on a daily basis with anything that's going on. You can contact your politicians, you can contact the employees of HS2, you can contact the contractors, and there's so much online stuff you can do, and I've put a link on the screen there. Finally, does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask about life on the camps or being involved in direct activism? I'll stop sharing so I can see you all again.
That was great. Thanks, Callum. I think what we'll do is we'll come back to questions in a moment. So That was really thought-provoking though, really, really interesting. I've certainly jotted down some questions, so thank you, Callum. Let's move on to Alan, who's kind of at the other end of things up in Lancashire, and where you might have a slightly different view of things, of what we could do going forward. So Alan, have you got a presentation as well, I think?
I do, yeah. Here it is. Just put it on slideshow. Can everybody see that? I'm never sure with technology. Today I've been out on a moss, a lowland raised peat bog, looking at some rare types of plants that we've got there. The moss I've been out on today is in Lancashire. Whenever I go onto these mosses, I'm amazed at the actual size of these places, and the fact that the wildlife trusts and other conservation bodies are working so hard to actually create these fantastic areas for wildlife and for the environment. These peat bogs are really great areas for carbon capture and carbon storage. Probably more efficient than the forests. I know there's a little bit of conjecture about that, but they are very, very efficient if they're actually treated in the right way. This is the one you're looking at here is Little Walden Moss, which is about 100 hectares, and it's just outside of Manchester. And this is part of the Chat Moss complex, which used to run all the way from Liverpool to Manchester. Liverpool to Manchester used to be a bog. There is a railway line that runs across there, which was actually built 100 years ago, and it's the first passenger railway line to be built in this country, in the world actually, and it was built on top of the bog. You can actually see that railway line.
Alan, sorry,
yes.
Can I stop you for a minute? We can't see your presentation properly. If you go to the top where it says slideshow, click on slideshow at the top. I didn't know if it was just me, but the others in the chat saying that. If you click on slideshow at the top and then press, so in what you can see in the PowerPoint, maybe we're not seeing your screen. You're still sharing?
It says I'm still sharing, yeah.
Oh, that's it. Oh, no, you stopped sharing.
No, let's try again. I've only used one picture so far, by the way.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I know we haven't missed much yet. So now that's it. Click on, that's it from current slide. It's strange. We're not seeing it. All we're seeing is the original thing. Maybe if you click on, I don't know. Do you need to click on enable editing at the top, and then we might be able to see it better?
Again, all I'm seeing is the screen. Let me just try and. How about if I just kind of?
Oh, I've got it, haven't I? Shall I share it from here? Let's try again.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of pictures.
Click on I don't know if it's enable editing. That's the problem.
It could be enable editing, couldn't it? Right, let's try again. The PowerPoint started. I do apologise.
Oh, it's all right.
Okay.
Now it's doing very straight. Right, okay, try again.
Try that.
There we are. Whee, we're off. Good.
Let's just try number 2. Yes, have we got number 2?
Yeah, that's it.
Can you see the moss? Yeah, right,
yeah,
good.
We're good.
Yeah, so this is Little Walden Moss. As I say, this is part of a number of areas that we've bought over the years, and we own quite a large area of that Chat Moss area. But the railway line used to run or runs across what was the moss, and it's now about 20 feet higher than where the moss was, and that was because of peat extraction and other uses like agriculture. So the moss is basically really fragmented into little bits, but there are still these important parts. So over the past 20, 30 years, we've been trying to create these boggy habitats, which should look like this, with all sorts of sphagnum moss and cotton grass. Unfortunately, the work we're doing there is going to be cut in half by HS2, which is basically going to run across and create a permanent barrier across the moss. I think the biggest problem we've got with it is the fact that we don't feel as though we've been consulted about this, because there would have been ways that they could have actually created a bridge or a viaduct across the mosses to actually create green bridges and to do that. But again, there seems to be a lack of consultation about this whole thing. And as I say, these are beautiful wilderness areas surrounded by motorways and the A580 and a railway line. But to have one splitting the whole thing in two is basically, as far as we're concerned, going back to the days when the mosses were exploited, and this guy here is cutting peat from the bog for people's fires and people's gardens. Obviously, we're heavily involved in peat-free campaigns to stop this sort of thing going on. But I think the real major problem we've got to these amazing landscapes and the amazing wildlife that you can actually get there is going to be just how much damage HS2 is going to do that. As wildlife trusts, we're working to create nature recovery networks. This basically cuts our nature recovery network in half. There's a lot of rare species on this picture, particularly the bladderwort in the hand there, which it wasn't around on Little Walden moss and Astley moss a couple of years ago. Now there's about 30 to 40,000 pieces of this carnivorous plant surviving there. And again, there are lots of different kinds of sphagnum moss, which we're trying to recreate these peaty areas, which sphagnum moss, as well as peat, actually stores carbon. Earlier this summer, we came to the end of a couple of years project to bring butterflies under the plants back to the Manchester mosslands. This is cotton grass, which is the food plant of the Lancashire, the large sheath butterfly. Now, this butterfly has been extinct in Manchester for 150 years. In April and May, this butterfly flew for the first time on the Manchester mosses in 150 years, which I'm actually getting a cold shiver down my back thinking about it. And it's this amazing work that we've been doing down there that again, we fear for some of the projects we've got down there because of what HS2 is going to bring, and we don't feel that HS2 has taught as consultative enough as enough. We don't feel there's been enough talk of compensation, and obviously compensation if this thing actually goes ahead. But again, how can you compensate for something that's going to basically put a scar down the middle of the work we've been doing for the last 20, 30 years? It's basically habitat fragmentation, and as I say, we haven't had discussions about anything that could be done there. In the northwest, we do have a slight problem in that a lot of the politicians want to see HS2 built. Andy Burnham is keen on HS2 for economic reasons. Andy Burnham's been down to the mosses and is absolutely in love with the place, but we've not spoken to Andy yet about. He's very good on the environment. We've not actually spoken to him yet about what exactly is going to happen and how he's going to help us. And we are lobbying MPs as well. One of the things we are keen to do at the moment, and we just started a small campaign to ask people where the wild things were, which is looking at lost landscapes that have been destroyed by development or removed by development, and trying to get people to break into the memory banks to remember some of these things, so we can stress that if this thing is going to happen and it isn't done right, then we're going to lose more and more lost landscapes. We're going to lose, more and more landscapes in the northwest and across the UK. So it's vitally important that if HS2 is going to happen, And as I say, it looks like the politicians are in favour of it in the Northwest, but it's got to be done right, and they've got to come back to the table and actually tell us how they're going to help wildlife. Sorry about the technical problems.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Ellen. That was brilliant. Yeah, I was just while you were talking about that last bit, I don't know who watched Autumn Watch last night with Chris Packham and co. And on there they had a feature about a nature reserve that was an area where there was lots of coal mining, and it's now good for bird watching, a wetland. And they were talking about how useful it is for people's health and well-being. So I think you're right, Alan. It's not just about the loss of habitat; it's about that effect on people that rely on those areas.
I think one thing that we need to stress in the Northwest, we've had coal mining, we've had peat extraction, we've tidied up these areas and we've made them better. It's not an expectation that we're going to do this every time they make a mess of things. They've got to do things right now, because we're living in the 21st century now.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I love it. Right. Thank you to all our panelists. Has anyone got any particular questions? I think we've heard lots. Just to recap, we've got Kay, who in her original role at the Woodland Trust was kind of involved right from the very beginning when this was first proposed. I think you said 10, 12 years ago it was first proposed, and it was supported across all the parties as being a great idea. And then interestingly, you said, I think it was Carol, said actually the line from London to Birmingham is only going to reduce people's travel time by 10 minutes, which seems madness to me. So Carol has been involved in sort of the legal challenges. So the decision to actually go ahead with phase 1 only happened early on this year. The actual final go ahead was, I think you said February this year or March this year, it was given the go ahead. And we're now seeing that happening in the news. There was the coverage just last week of the felling of the Cubbington pear, which is a 250-year-old pear tree. We've got Callum, who has, I liked Kay's phrase that she's used before. Callum has been there and he's borne witness to some of the destruction and the felling that's going on. And then we've got Alan up in the north there, where we can hopefully still do something to try and stop this juggernaut that is HS2, hopefully, from going beyond Birmingham upwards. So has anyone got any questions that they thought of? You're all looking very quiet at the moment. No one's typed anything in particular in the chat box yet. Has anyone got any questions? You can type it or you can raise your hand and ask it verbally. Caitlin, yeah? Do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, my question's for Callum. You mentioned like you kind of don't want activists coming if they've not got much experience. Where would we access the non-violent direct action training if it's something like you want to get involved in? Where would we like start doing that?
Yeah, so with that, we don't want people to be involved in an action that's potentially arrestable without having the training. Not that they don't come to the camps without trainings. So the trainings are given on camps. Other rebels and activists can do advice. There's also some good online resources on the Extinction Rebellion website that can give trainings and talks there.
Callum, one question I thought of while you were talking, Callum, was how do you decide on the camps who's going to do which kind of actions? You know, who's going to be up in a tree or who's going to chain themselves? How do you decide that?
So normally we have a group of people that are willing to be arrested on the camp. Those people will sort of decide autonomously, I want to do an action, and then work out the support that's needed for that. So one day you could have someone that's locked themselves to the ground by the gate, and then the next day you could have someone up a tree. So they're all sort of happening simultaneously and autonomously, and that's normally decided like in a morning check-in with all people from the camp.
Right, thank you. So some of you, when you registered, you did type questions, and I've got one here from someone called Owen, and I can see that there is an Owen logged in, but he isn't on camera. Owen, are you happy to ask your question? It was one about injunctions. Ah, there you are, Owen. Was it you that wrote that question? Do you want to ask it now, if you can remember it?
Cool. I'll see if I can remember. I was just going to ask, from a legal perspective, if you could talk a bit about, there's been news about the use of injunctions against protesters, and there was a guy called Elliot, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Gugurian, recently was in the news because he was trying to be jailed for it, and I was wondering if you talk about it from the legal perspective.
Okay, thank you. Carol, do you want to have a go at that? I know it's not your area of expertise, but if you can.
No, well, it is, but only in a kind of civil sense that I talked about in the context of the judicial review. We've had experience also of injunctions which have been used by companies like INEOS in a fracking context, where, interesting, they were actually applying for sort of injunctions to apply in the future. So it wasn't even as if there were protesters around a fracking site and they were trying to get an injunction. They were actually trying to get a blanket injunction on all of the prospective sites they were involved in to stop any sort of future protests happening there. That's something we've never come across before. But all of the injunction experience I've had has really been around something like a judicial review. And the injunctions, I think, probably that you mean are probably might be more of a sort of a criminal law measure where you're trying to remove protesters from the land, which I don't know that much about, I'm afraid. But I know that Callum mentioned that he did know a little bit about that side of things in terms of the training he'd had with XR. I didn't know whether he might want to come in on that.
Yeah, Callum?
I probably know not much more than what Owen knows, so yeah, I'll leave it and pass.
That's all right. That's okay. Good. Has anyone else got any questions at the moment? I'm just looking at my notes. We also had Guy. I know Guy's here. Do you remember the question that you typed originally? Yours was about the corridor of trees. Do you remember? Do you want to ask it or shall I ask it? You go ahead.
Yeah. How can we be sure that the people who are being given the responsibilities for planting the trees are capable of creating a biodiverse habitat?
Thank you. So I think this is in reference to the fact that HS2 have said for all the trees that they fell, they will replant trees. Alan, do you want to have a go at answering that as someone from a Wildlife Trust? Oh, you say no. Have a go.
No, yeah, I think generally they will have to come to people like the Wildlife Trust and the Woodland Trust and people like that and ask for their advice. I know that we've already got the Northern Forest where a number of groups are involved in that. So I would think that if they've got any sense, they'd actually come to the experts and ask them.
Okay. Kay, have you got any? Yeah.
Well, I can just add to that. So it's a really good question, and actually the truth of the matter is that HS2 Limited has its own special regulations, its own special licenses to do damage to nature that Natural England have provided to them. Because it's this national infrastructure, it has its own legal system, as I was saying, but also it's responsible for itself. It's self-policing, and the government and Natural England, who are the government's advisors, have basically said HS2 is self-policing. There's only so much that we as government advisors can actually do to stop them. And because they had all these special licenses, they have basically permission to do all sorts of things like block up badger sets outside of season, that kind of stuff. And that's been sanctioned by the government. So, you know, although a lot of people tried to stop it, and so HS2 do feel quite justified in what they're doing. And they do feel quite defensive about what they're doing as well, because as far as they're concerned, they have permission, they have the legal wherewithal to do all this. And the idea of them being held to account is quite difficult to work out, because who do we get to hold them to account? One of the things that I think is really important that Alan was saying about, you know, NGOs like us are going to have to be the ones that do try and hold them to account. So HS2 does have special licenses, special permissions. We do need to be there to be able to say, you're breaking that license, or you're going against that assurance. But it's so difficult at the moment, obviously with COVID. Wildlife Trust, we're all charities. All the NGOs are all, you know, non-governmental groups. They're all based on funding, and we're all short on people, on capacity. But it's really, really, really important that anyone who sees activity on sites that are going against those promises that they're making, that they can hold them to account, complain to HS2, complain to Natural England. And the other thing to consider is that also, it does sound quite boring and complicated, but once you start to understand how HS2 is working, you'll start to see stuff about it in the papers, and you can get your MP, if nothing else, get your MP to be the one to speak on your behalf, because they can put pressure on HS2. They won't necessarily be able to be heard if there's just one of them, but as more of us can talk to our MPs, they are representatives. So as much as we can do is to get MPs to hold them to account. But I can tell you now, the compensation, the mitigation that HS2 Limited are proposing for removing inadequate, it's been a lot. So the best that we can do at the moment is to keep pushing, keep challenging them with what they're doing and going and looking at the detail. But your MP is the best person for us at the moment, which is a good and bad thing. At least they're there to be representatives for us. They don't always listen, but please make sure that you're telling them and asking them these questions, because they can then ask those questions in Parliament and of HS2 themselves.
Thank you. Carol, how is it possible if we have, I don't understand anything about the legal system, but if we have sets of laws, be them environmental laws or whatever they might be, how can it be possible to give HS2 Limited kind of, I've written down here, carte blanche to do whatever they want, to be, they don't seem to be accountable to anyone. How is that possible?
Thanks, Kat. Well, they wouldn't agree with that. They would say that they fought for many years through a parliamentary process to get those permissions. You know, Kay mentioned it earlier, the hybrid bill process, it's a very long process. And it kind of wends its way through Parliament with petitions, with select committees. When the bill is published, there's an enormous amount of environmental information published as well. You know, so all of that process goes through, and they would say, look, you know, it's a democratic situation. We've been given, the bill's got royal assent. Everybody's had their opportunity to feed into that. So that's how these very large infrastructure projects, it's not just HS2, we're talking about Crosswell, we're talking about the Channel Tunnel. You know, this is very often how these very big projects get through, because part of them is that actually the opportunities for public engagement are actually quite difficult. They're quite limited, and the cards are stacked against you, because obviously it's got a government backing as a bill. And so therefore, if you've got a very large majority like you've got now, you're obviously using all of those opportunities that you can, but you know, it's a bit of an uphill struggle. So they would hide behind all of that and say that that's what they've got behind them. But the one point I would make is that obviously that whole process for HS2 phase 1 started 12 years ago, and I think we are quite literally in a different climate now. And I do think that a really important point that Callum made was about the increase in cost and the increase in delay that people on the ground are causing now, and how that will then feed through into the next round of the parliamentary bill process. And I think everybody would be much better informed now about what are the real costs of HS2, because of course the costs have spiraled completely out of control. What are the real environmental impacts? Because a lot of things have come forward, even from the enormous environmental statements that were done. We've just been talking to some people on the ground in Joneswood, where they're doing some work at the moment, where they just found barbastelle bats. They weren't in the environmental statement. Nobody knew they were there. And HS2 are shining enormous lights into the light to try and, you know, basically move these bats on. What they won't do is move them on. They'll actually starve them. You know, they'll stay where they are and they'll starve to death. But, you know, I think there's a lot more information. There is a lot more public awareness about these kinds of projects. So I don't want to be gloomy about the parliamentary process, because I think going forward we will hopefully be in a different climate and be able to influence that. But I think going back, I think it's very difficult to dispute, because, you know, they would say, well, we've just got those permissions.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. I watch so many things and think I feel like we have no power as people to say enough. Now we're getting lots of questions coming through in the chat. Henry's put one, and there's a few others. Let's go back. I think
Grace put an earlier.
Grace, you said you had a question. Can you remember what it was? Still, it was a while ago that you put that you had a question you wanted to ask.
Oh, hi. My internet is very unstable, so I hope you can hear me.
Just about.
Yeah, it was just a bit strange that listening to all like the legal stuff, it just seems very us versus them, and it seems strange that it's allowed to go this far when the general feeling is against it. It almost seems like when we were talking about the judges making decisions and the courts and like their general feeling, it seemed like they were almost making it any old excuse to get it through, like, oh, you're 3 days past the deadline, or you can't do this, or actually it's this. It seemed like they weren't very good reasons, you know. And it raises questions about like what are their motivations? Do they not have any sort of like guilt about the environment? And it all just seems a bit suspicious and quite disappointing to think that all the efforts that people have put in trying to sort of fight against it legally have not really been that successful. Which seems a shame.
Yeah.
Can I say something on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want you to all go away and think, oh God, I'm not going into environmental law. That's a complete nightmare. You know, you're never going to win cases. But you know, the reality is that we are working with a judiciary that is not familiar with these issues and inherently are not empathetic at all. And you know, we're trying with things like the Badger Cull, we're trying with things like raptor persecution, we're trying with HS2 and Heathrow, and you know, we are probably going to lose a lot of them. We're probably going to lose most of them. But you know, it's really, really important that we keep up that fight. And it's important that we keep up that fight across the whole spectrum of what we're doing, right from the direct activists in the woods through to what the Wildlife Trust and other NGOs are doing with their everyday campaigning, policy work and lobbying, through to the work that we're doing in the courts. And it's the combination of all of that that we hope eventually will actually cause, will bring about more of a sea change. But I think it is true. I think the government at the moment is very antagonistic towards the law. I don't know how much you know about JR, but cases like Miller, as a result of Brexit, have really hardened the government against lawyers and activist lawyers in particular. But you've probably seen the remarks that Priti Patel and Boris Johnson have just made about lefty lawyers. You know, it's a very, very difficult climate to be working in the moment. That does not mean to say that it's not hugely rewarding and really important, and we need a new generation of environmental lawyers coming through. So I really hope that by being here and listening to this, that hopefully this will make you think, well, this is quite an interesting area, I might want to do that, because that's exactly how I started and got into it.
Good, thank you. Alan, you got your hand up there.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a confusing situation at the moment where people should be caring about the environment and people seem to be caring a lot more about money. But I mean, in my opinion, the most important people involved in this whole thing are you guys. You know, young people, this is your future. You should be raising your voices, speaking to your MPs. This is the kind of thing we need. I went on a train in... a long time ago now. It must have been late last year, and I got a train from Chorley to London, and it took 2 hours, and that was a fantastic 2 hours to sit and read and actually. I don't understand why people want to get there 20 minutes quicker. It's just a weird thing that a lot of money's being spent on something that maybe a lot of us don't understand. Certainly in the north, we'd much prefer money to go on a transport system where people can actually get buses from their own homes, stop using the cars, get across from east to west rather than north to south. As I say, a lot of these decisions are strange, but you're the people, you're the ones who can actually make the difference here by speaking to your MPs. You're the future voters or the present voters, and you should be you should be speaking and telling people about what you feel.
Yeah, thank you. Someone's just put a comment there, Grace. It seems like an awful waste of money for 20 minutes. Do any of you, Kay, maybe, do you know what their current bill is running at for HS2?
The current bill. I understand that I believe it's going to be up to over £100 billion, I think, is the current budget, which is at least double than what it was going to be 5 years ago, which is at least double what it was going to be 10 years ago. The bill for nature, though, I can tell you, because I found it on my internet, looking on my laptop now, but I found it. But the bill for nature would be at least, and this is the Wildlife Trust, I sent you an email, Kat, with this link. The Wildlife Trust assessed the whole of the impact on the routes based on the evidence that was available. And one of the key things that I think is important to bear in mind is that there is not a lot of environmental data that you can access. And one of the things that we really need to understand is that the lack of data means bad decisions are being made all the time. There's a lot of ancient woodland is not, there's an inventory for ancient woodland, but it's not really as up to date as it could be. It demands a lot of ground truthing. So, you know, the kind of stuff that Alan knows about, you know, peat bogs, we need people to map that before we know what's in it, before we know what's going to be destroyed and how we can then deal with that. So bear that in mind. That's not okay, but it's important to understand that I don't think that anyone's deliberately damaging nature in an evil way. It's that nature is not at the heart of this decision. It's not at the heart of a lot of decisions. There will be at least 33 sites of special scientific interest destroyed and damaged by HS2 across the whole of the route. There will be 21 local nature reserves. There will be, I think you said, Carol, 108 at least ancient woodlands being damaged and destroyed. 693 local wildlife sites, which are protected areas that Wildlife Trust look after, and almost 10,000 hectares worth of nature-based habitat that's at risk. And there's also the link that Mia's just put up. There's also the potential for local extinctions of certain species in some parts of the route. Now, that information has been put together by the Wildlife Trust this year. It was all available in small silo details. It was part of different environmental assessments because the whole of the route's been done in silos, in small, well, large, but in patches. And that's also a problem with infrastructure because no one's looking at the cumulative impacts of things like HS2. No one's looking at the cumulative impacts of Sizewell C versus Hinkley Point versus HS2, but, you know, on nature. And it's really crucial that, as Alan was saying, you know, you as the next generation can help us and get people to understand how important nature is, but how valuable that data is going to be, so you can make justified, good decisions, but also to give nature that priority to say we can't afford to lose these important carbon stores for the sake of this important transport infrastructure. We should do this differently because we can't do that differently. And that's kind of the decisions that I'm hoping that we can all start to make. And there's one thing I wanted to say, Kat, if you don't mind. HS2 is a really good example of how bad decision making, lack of public engagement, bad data that hasn't been updated, and the legal system has allowed a lot of destruction already that's been unnecessary. HS2 is a good example of how infrastructure should not happen, but it's also the way that new planning decisions in your community, in your neighbourhoods, could be happening in the future. And to just move us from HS2 slightly for a second into planning as a whole, the planning system, which HS2 is not subject to, we earlier, it's got its own little special rules. The planning system that we all live by, so everything where our own homes are developed, schools, that kind of stuff. The planning system in England is being reformed under this government, and that's something that we at the Wildlife Trust do want to see, because actually it's not working. You can see how badly we are all off for nature on our doorsteps. But the planning reforms put forward suggest things like not using up-to-date data, not allowing people to get involved in plan decisions at a good stage, you know, thinking about things not in the round, not looking at cumulative impacts, and not bringing nature into the heart of that. And there's one more day to go for you guys to respond to planning reforms, and the Wildlife Trust can help you do that, as well as there are a few other campaigns that are working on it. But the Wildlife Trust has a campaign action where you can use HS2 as a good example of saying, I've heard about this. Yes, it's infrastructure, but you're suggesting similar ways that we can get development in our communities done, and that's not how we want things to be. Nature has to be part of it, and Carol and Callum have both, you know, a bit more now in the last 5 or 6 years, in the last 10 years, how important nature is, and lockdown has been a revelation for so many people about how important nature on our doorstep is. Don't allow HS2 to impact on your community, and don't let this be the last part of the story for HS2 or for development. You have the power.
Yeah, thank you. I've various points I thought of there. I think firstly, kind of ecology is quite a young science, and that's why there isn't enough evidence, perhaps, which is what you're talking about, enough evidence of the effects of this kind of infrastructure. Secondly, we live in an age, a country where of capitalism, it's all about money and things having financial value. So things like, you know, your sphagnum moss doesn't have a direct financial value, does it, Alan? And that's very difficult to equate when you're talking to developers and this kind of thing. Mia, I did ask you earlier to put that, if you could put the link in the chat box for me about that planning reform that Kay was talking about, that'd be really good. There's questions coming up. Hang on, Oliver has said he has a question for Kay. Do you want to say it, Oliver, or shall I read it out for you?
No, that's fine. Hi everyone. I've actually lost it because I did write it. It was basically, yeah, just for Kay, please. Just on that, I termed it bespoke. I don't think you said that, but the sort of bespoke planning rules for HS2. Where can I find further information sort of on that, sort of easily?
The best place, Google hybrid bill, HS2 as well, and it will explain to you in detailed ways about how the hybrid bill, which is this kind of that bespoke way, the hybrid bill has allowed HS2 as a project to kind of straddle the parliamentary process. So it's allowed it to go through royal assent and get decided on in various chunks. And it was, I think it might have been specially designed or used for one of the first times for HS2, but it's a hybrid bill process.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thank you. If it's possible, Kay, could you maybe type that in the chat box, and then what I will do, guys, is the recording of the chat box, I'll email it all round to you afterwards, and then you have a copy of all these links that Mia's been putting in for us as well.
I'll have a look.
Yeah, if you can find a link to put in there, that's useful. There was an article that I shared with all of you beforehand to have a read of, and there was a really interesting idea in there that so HS2 is saying, oh, we're only moving a little bit of woodland here and a little bit of a nature reserve there, and the guy writing the article made a really interesting comparison. He said, well, if we went into the National Gallery and removed a corner of every painting in there, there would be an outcry. This was a Guardian article I shared, and I just thought that's really interesting. Yeah, you know, so people like HS2 are saying, oh, it's just a bit of a woodland, it's just a bit of that nature reserve. And I just thought that's really interesting. There was also within that article, they were talking about the fact that HS2 has made promises that there will be no net loss of biodiversity in the building of HS2, in the idea that they're going to be replanting trees and things like that. So to the panel, is that even possible? Callum, go on. Callum's got his hand up.
Yeah, and this also touches on what Guy was saying earlier as well. Having been to the camps and seen the trees that they've replanted, so I went to Crackley Woods and saw the trees that they'd replanted in 2018. Those trees have now been dug up or left to die. And those, either through lack of watering, inappropriate soil, machines running over them in some cases for days on end. So when HS2 say they are having no biodiversity loss, that's completely greenwashing, because it's they're replanting trees and then killing even more trees. And as has been said in the chat I was reading before, you can't replace sort of the biodiversity and the whole ecosystem that is within a forest or woodlands, especially by even the carbon that a 250-year-old pear tree could sequester. So yeah, that's completely greenwashing. Also noticed some other questions came through. Alan, I noticed you said before about the 20 minutes. I was actually learning about this the other day, and because a lot of people do commute to London or Birmingham, the economic benefit doesn't even stand anymore, because the commuting time that is lost by the 20 minutes does not outweigh the economic gain in productivity that this railway causes. Also, I can't remember who said it, but the most recent figure for HS2 is currently 200 billion. It's doubled in the last couple of months, which is insane, considering how much things like the NHS cost and what that money could be spent on for the better. It's currently estimated that that actually cost £250 to £300 per ticket of HS2. So this is a fast train for fat cats, and the everyday folk will not benefit from it at all. Yeah, also just want to finally just touch on the power of politics, but also the power of grassroots activism. So as a lot of young people here, you may not have a say in politics. I know I didn't in the last general election, and that has determined my whole future at university and everything like that, and I'm sure many people here in the same boat. However, so there is some power in politics, like campaigning for what's called the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. If your MP can back this bill, it will lead to a legally binding agreement similar to the Paris Agreement that puts in law and reverses HS2. So that's something that can be petitioned for. But also often our politics aren't representative of us. So do get involved in grassroots activism, as has been proven in the past with the civil rights movement.
Thanks, Callum, that's really good. Yes, I think we mustn't throw our hands up and despair. You know, there are things that you can do, there are things that you can get involved in, and it's really important. I'm just skimming back through. Anyone got any particular questions on it? I think, Zach, you had a question, didn't you? It was a while ago, though. Yeah, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. How can we protect our nature reserves from HS2? And I've emailed them and they've not got back to me. So I've asked them about, please could you give the nature reserves back to the Wildlife Trust, because they're really important. And what can we do?
Who did you email? An MP or HS2?
HS2 directly.
Yeah. Because like,
so what can we do?
Yeah, thank you. So like, Alan, you were talking about your reserves, like your mosses. How would you envisage that maybe HS2 could happen without damaging them? Is that possible?
Well, I mean, if you look at what's been going on in the south, it doesn't fill you with a great deal of hope. Obviously, we will be doing everything in our powers and our legal powers to stop anything happening there, and we will be encouraging people to support us to stop things happening on any of our nature reserves. It's not just about nature reserves. It's about, you know, as I say, it's about this whole nature network, nature recovery network that we're trying to create around the UK. Without that, you know, we're going to lose a lot of wildlife anyway. We're going to lose a lot of species. So it's trying to drive this home to the people in power, who have actually got power to stop HS2 riding roughshod over some of our nature reserves.
Yeah, thank you. I'm aware it's 6:30 and time's ticking on, and people are looking at their time and probably need to go. So, is Dan still with us? Dan, do you want to ask the question that you wrote in? Are you there, Dan? He might not be. I know he's having problems with his internet. Because someone else asked something different. So I'm going to put this to all the panelists in turn. What could young people of this age group, what could they do to prevent damaging developments like HS2 occurring? So I'm going to go around each of the panelists in turn. What would be your number one or your top 3 things that you would ask people to do of this age group? What could they do? Carol, if I come to you first, what would you say?
Yeah, and apologies that I've got to skip off. I might have to go after this because I've got another call with we're trying to settle a case which is in Courtsborough. What would I say? I would say I think what Extinction Rebellion are doing is brilliant, and had I been young and brave enough, I would love to be doing that. And I think it's really important that you're showing how, you know, everybody, young generation, feels about these kind of things. I appreciate XR takes in everybody from all demographics, but it's been really heartening to see people sort of getting down and doing that. I think Kay mentioned it about engaging in the parliamentary process. Absolutely, MPs are vital for this kind of thing. I know it sounds really, really dull to think about lobbying and signing online permissions and writing letters, but it really does make a difference. I've seen that time and time again with various different campaigns that I've been involved with through WWF and RSPB. And I think also, yeah, I mean, you know, I think if anybody is interested in getting involved in something like environmental law, that is a fantastic thing to do. And I think, you know, the more you can engage in the political process and, you know, sort of get involved in sort of a career where you have some kind of, you know, where you can make a difference, I mean, you know, so much the better. I think that's brilliant. So I'm sure that's not, it's a bit rambling and not very focused, but that's probably it.
That's great. Thank you, Carol, and thank you for your time.
And I'm
that's
so
really
sorry.
good.
Mind if I leave? I'm so
No,
sorry.
It's fine. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Alan, what would you say? What would be your top tips for maybe things that youngsters could do?
I would, going back to what Colin was saying and what Caitlin was asking before about, how, you know, how would you get experience of getting involved in something like XR or something like the Wildlife Trust? Go along just go along and see. Go along, and you don't have to get involved straight away. Go and have a look. I mean, when I was younger, I went on a couple of G8 marches, G9, and kind of just stood back and watched and decided where I wanted to get involved. And you can do that. You can actually stand back and decide what level you want to go at. So if you want to be involved in Extinction Rebellion, who are doing a great job of causing these fantastic events to draw attention to climate change, or if you'd rather look at something like the Wildlife Trust on a more political level and ask us what we're doing, and we kind of help people to speak to their MPs and speak to other politicians. There are different levels you can get involved in, but as I say, you're young people. You've got the voices. You can speak up now, because this is your future that they're messing with. So speak up now and do something about it.
Thank you. Yeah. On that note, I would add, Alan's from Lancashire Wildlife Trust. I'm from Shropshire Wildlife Trust. More and more wildlife trusts now have some kind of youth group or youth organisation. In terms of the work that they do. So do look on your local Wildlife Trust website, or even, you know, write an email to the Wildlife Trust and say, what are you doing about this? Yeah, I would echo that. Callum, what would you encourage your peers to do?
Probably, and I'll say it time and time again, just get involved with youth activism. I saw Grace actually asked if we can link relevant groups. I'll put my email in the chat. You can message me about XR Youth, and I'm happy to respond and answer questions on there. So there's XR Youth groups up and down the country, and as Alan has rightly said, we are young people, we are the future. So if we can get together and build a growing youth movement, we can do it, and we'll be the people inheriting this planet. So we've really got to make a stand and get our voices heard. I'd also say the act of education is really important. So current education system, you don't learn about things like this. So if you can talk to your educational institution, your school, your college, your university about learning more about environmental things and local campaigns, geography is a great subject for this, slightly biased, as is probably me. But yeah, speak to your friends, tell them about what you've learnt today about HS2, and just go along to one of the camps and see what you can do to help. Everyone's welcome.
Good, thank you. I have to say, actually, on that front, there is a group, isn't there, campaigning about more education around environmental issues. I think Kay might know this. Is it called Teach First? I think it's called
Teach the Future. Teach the
Future, yeah. And they are campaigning on exactly that there should be more education around. There is also in consultation a possible natural history GCSE coming up in the future. So, you know, even if you're still in school, talk to your teachers, say we need to be doing more on this. There is also a campaign as part of Our Bright Futures that I'm involved with around that there should be more time spent outdoors as part of the everyday school week as well. So even you can campaign on that level as well, in terms of if you don't feel you're getting enough education on these things, do it. So it is now 20 to 7. Kay, what would you say? What's your top tips?
So I have 3 things for everyone, but especially for you guys that are listening and contributing today. Get involved, respond to the planning consultation that I mentioned earlier. Please, 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 you have one more day to do it. And it is important, because these are the kind of things that we were talking about earlier, decisions being made that are going to affect you as potential new homeowners, the potential community members, these are all planning decisions that will matter to your community, your neighbourhood, your doorsteps in the future. So everyone, please do respond to that, and tell the government in the little box that you are a young person. You're responding as somebody who's looking at the future, because it does matter that they hear you. The second thing is to engage in the planning system, not just the parliamentary system. Definitely speak to your MPs, but the planning system itself. Reforms, you know, one thing, but look at the posters on the lampposts. Look onto your council's website, find out what's happening near you. You can only respond to stuff and really start to influence things if you engage in it. It's not sexy, but it is really important. And the more people that do engage, the more chance you have of getting your voice and your views taken into account. And then finally, as a bit of what everyone else has kind of said, use the spaces near you, get into nature, make sure that they are valued and people know that they're valuable to you before the chainsaws come. Because when it comes to that point, when it comes to contractors coming down with their diggers and everything else, it's too late to make a difference. People need to hear from you how important that small patch of woodland is, or that park, or that green space, before it becomes at risk. Because when it is earmarked for development, somebody will go, oh, do you know what? I see people there all the time, or I heard from someone how important that was. Use the space near you, get involved in nature, get out. Teach your friends, your children when they come, your family, everyone that we are talking about, even the people that work for HS2, they're all real people, you know, and they're all family members, they're all partners, they're all carers, volunteers, whatever. They're all actual people, just like we all are outside of our different hats that we wear. And if we can convince each other and ourselves to care about nature and put nature first, we've got more chance of that feeding into decisions like these ones.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really important. It is, yeah. Go out and make use of the spaces near you, and I don't know, be evangelical about the things that you're seeing. Yeah, I think even today I was out on a walk with some of these youngsters, and Guy was showing me photos he'd taken recently. I'm like, share them, show them on social media, share the love for nature, and the more people embrace it and enjoy it, the more value people might put in that as well, I think. Yeah, good. Anyone got any other questions? Oh, there is some discussion about the deadline on this planning reform thing. It's midnight tomorrow, I think, isn't it, Kay? Yeah, so click that link.
11:45 p.m. tomorrow night, so yeah, tomorrow night. But and the link, I know that Mia's put it on, but the short link, I'll tell you now, is wtru.st/do-not-fail-wildlife. wtru.st/do-not-fail-wildlife. If you can remember that, then you're in. But I think the link is in the chat as well.
Good.
Can I just tell you about a coincidence? I was driving back today, discussing with my mum that I was going to be getting involved in this discussion tonight, and she's just told me that my brother put an offer on a house in Cheshire yesterday, and has decided to drop the offer. He loved the house, but he's heard that HS2 is coming nearby. Oh. Just by complete coincidence, spooky.
Yeah. That's it. It's not bothering me, so I'm not going to get involved. But if I did happen to have a house there, then I wouldn't want it, kind of thing. Yeah. This is it. And I think probably lots of people knew that it was on the cards, but didn't really get engaged or involved in it until now. We're seeing the coverage in the news of compulsory purchase orders and people losing houses or farmland or trees being taken down. Yeah. So the other thing I would say to all of you is read the newspapers, look and see what's going on and what's coming up, and then engage with it and campaign against it.
Just the headlines as well. Don't just read the headlines.
No. Look further, look deeper. Spend time reading these articles and talking to people about it. Right, it's 7:15. I think it's time for dinner. Anyone else got any last comments or final questions that they want to give? No, it's been brilliant. Callum, you got one more thing, yeah?
I'd just like to thank Kat for setting this up and hosting really well.
Thanks,
thank you, that's very kind. No, it's been brilliant, and thank you all for coming. It's been really good. Like I said, I will email all this stuff going on in the chat box. I'll email that all round to you all. It probably won't be tomorrow, it'll be Friday, but yeah. Thank you very, very much, everyone. It's been brilliant.